All right, so let's go through some of the key ideas we did last time. Right? We're coming back and saying there are two kinds of performance regions. You have a competence or textbook envelope that depends on the kinds of plans, the model, the plans, the roles, the rules that you work through to do normal work. Normal work can have lots of contingencies, lots of things it's adapted to. So this is adaptive. It's your base adaptive capacity. It's what you're good at. It's what you understand. It's what's well modeled. It's a good fit between your capabilities, your response capabilities, and the demands and variations in the world. There is a good fit. It's well modeled, means you have, right, you implement things that are a good fit to the changes in the world, therefore you get good performance. And we want to make this better. And you learn a lot about how to make this better, right? And we continue to make this better. But finite resources and change means that there are boundaries. There's a range of adaptive behavior, of adaptive capability in that competence envelope, right? And that means you will confront surprise. So this is why we just illustrated in the two anesthesia cases, right, that the safety manager and the attending anesthesiologist are acting as the snafu catchers, the trouble managers, the graceful extenders when things vary relative to plan and the dragons of surprise show up. Things not working. Right, now part of this came back and said there is a trade-off. In next class we're going to focus on trade-offs more on next Wednesday. It's trade-offs and hard. But that means these aren't independent capabilities you just add together, they interact, right? Because just what we illustrated, if you add capability at the boundaries, so when you're near saturation, right, I have the resources to draw on, it costs something. And those costs of time, workload, dollars, equipment, opportunity cost, all right, are taking away from the normal measures I would use to track to say how optimal I am here, right? My optimality score is going to go down because I invested resources in a bunch of these other things. Did it just die? That's all right. We had this identifying your keyboard. What the hell is this thing doing? What are we illustrating here? Anybody? Right? It's all supposed to work so smoothly on Apple. Yes?
I may not have caught it. What's the PR ratio?
Oh, I didn't get to it yet.
Okay.
Right? We just hit it on the safety manager. So there are two, so net adaptive value at a minimum has two numbers, right? How good am I in my competence envelope far from saturation, and how good am I at the borderlands when I have to exhibit graceful extensibility. How good am I here and how good am I there are two different measures. So you can say a cost benefit. I prefer to put it as a performance resource. How good a performance can you exhibit relative to the resources you invest? The safety manager was investing more resources in order to get a better performance in graceful extensibility should a crisis occur, right? The problem is these resources invested at this count against this. Makes this PR look worse. If I make this PR work better, what do I end up doing? I go, hey, let's get rid of that crisis training. I don't need it anymore. What does that do? That makes this one get worse. The safety manager has limited resources. Safety manager has to decide where to invest those resources to get a performance improvement in graceful extensibility, because I can't invest everywhere. Because if I invest everywhere to get more graceful extensibility, or just kind of go, well, I'm not sure this is really all that valuable, but I might as well try it. What am I doing? I'm killing this performance resource ratio because I'm investing a whole bunch of resources that reduce this, but I'm not necessarily getting a big gain in performance here. So if I'm managing these two capabilities, these two forms of adaptive capacity, my base adaptive capacity, right, and my extended capacity at the boundaries, right, I have to think about where do I get effectiveness for my resource investment. And those two are different and they interact with each other. Everyone thinks there's only one number. And that's not correct in the adaptive universe. It's technically incorrect to think there's one number. It takes two. And the problem is, the difficulty is these trade-off that interact with each other. So we're going to have to talk about how we manage and balance these things, and then a good architecture, right, to sustain adaptability is one that makes it easy to, while I'm improving this, to not degrade this, and when I'm improving this, to not hurt this too much. But I have to have some R over here, which looks bad over here, right? And I can't have too much R over here, right? So I better figure out what's good performance for the resources I can invest. All right? So that's why that's there. Next one. Oh, thank you. So, and as we illustrated in this, we saw dragons lurking. We want to avoid brittleness. So brittleness would be where the attending, right, was unable to keep up with the demands if a physiological crisis occurred, and you would see a collapse. And the collapse would occur in the patient's physiology as well as the team's ability to keep up with the deterioration in the physiological measures, right? And we'll talk about it. It'll be like falling off a cliff, right? Is the visual metaphor. They don't know exactly which dragons or whatever are there, but they know they have to deal with crunches ahead and deal with the way things can cascade. Right? And we've run some cases where the cascades, where there's procedures to do everything. Right? But the issue is what you do. You just introduce a little bit of trouble that slows things down. Right? You make this thing a little bigger, a little faster. And you make this other thing, oh, the communication slowed down a little bit, and I have to revisit it. Or next thing you know, they've done nothing wrong. But the thing is cascading out of control. So they can't keep pace, right, with the different events and demands over time. That will be, right, so you have to generate and sustain a readiness to respond. The anesthesiologist was generating a deployable readiness to respond. Deployable, immediately ready should a crisis start to occur. In the other case, we were building a mobilizable capability. Right? By doing the crisis training, I'm preparing people so they could mobilize as teams in order and know how to help each other and do things in order to handle a crisis. So in one case, it's a deployable readiness to respond. In the other case, I'm mobilizing my readiness to respond. Mm-hmm. Deploy, mobilize, generate. Boy, I hit it in the right place. Isn't that good? Right? So in our graceful extensibility, we've already illustrated, I need to be able to anticipate, right? And I need to be able to build a readiness to respond. Depending on how imminent the surprise might be, I need those resources deployable, all right? I may listen to signals that there's early warning signs of things starting to get out of whack. You know, a nurse didn't show up because of illness, and we had to merge some things. There was some extra surgery scheduled. There's some of the normal equipment we use is broken. You start to see these things, and you go, wait a minute, maybe I should start mobilizing, be ready to go if I need. Who do I call up? Where could I get a spare, etc. In order to be ready, so I'd have a deployable, I'd be able to quickly put together a deployable capability to respond should something happen. Not going. None of them are, our backup isn't working. This is illustrating everything perfectly, right? So we end up with net adaptive value. I have to do both. Right? It's not, I just pursue graceful extensibility, I have to do both, right? And that's illustrated in our anesthesia cases and how they might be at risk of not being sustainable capabilities. We didn't talk much about the attendings, what's sustainable there, forms of expertise, other resources, equipment, potentially depending on the kind of case. Next one. So what we end up with is the three ways, we're going to talk about one of them today. There's three ways that adaptive systems break down. It doesn't matter what kind of adaptive system, where it is, doesn't matter what scale, they all turn into three ways things break down. We're going to deal with the decompensation versus anticipation today. Working at cross purposes involves our network, different roles at different levels and how they synchronize together. So are we working at cross purposes, or are we synchronizing those to achieve larger ends? And as learning broke down. In the crisis management example, the safety manager is exhibiting proactive learning, recognizing something has changed in the environment that requires a step without waiting for a poorly handled crisis in the outpatient surgery. Didn't react to a bad crisis poorly handled, right? They anticipated and intervened before they had a bad one. So proactive learning about how their world was changing. And notice in that case, it was changing as a result of success, right? Because we're better at surgery, better at handling complications, better at dealing with people, more microsurgery, et cetera, we can be more effective in making that surgical resource available to a larger population at a lower cost. Right? Remember, lower cost in medicine isn't simply money, it's also access and equity for patients. Right? If I can do it at a lower cost, more people can have the benefits of that medical treatment. Next one. All right, so go back to our glossary now. Take these examples and you go, what have we illustrated? We've started to illustrate adaptive units, or UABs, right, or units of adaptive behavior. We started to illustrate, and we'll talk next week about how we think about deciding what's a unit, right, how to put them together, how to chart the neighborhood. You're going to do that because you're going to chart the rise of high-frequency trading. You're going to start playing around with that in their relationships. Adaptive capacities, we've been talking about those. Range of adaptive behavior, brittleness, right, where you fall off rapidly. That's related to risk of saturation or exhausting your capability to respond or to keep pace with the demands and changes in the world. All right, and we've mentioned adaptive value, in particular, which is a long-standing term in evolutionary thinking, and we've made it net adaptive value because there's two kinds of processes that both have to work if I want to be fit in terms of handling the changing demands the world throws at me. Right? And being fit isn't a one-time solution. Right? It's an ongoing process. In biology, this is called the struggle for fitness. The struggle for fitness is ongoing. Right? It doesn't end. That's why we're navigating seas of complexity. We're not implementing a solution showing it's effective and done. We are generating a capability to continue to steer and navigate through a changing landscape as we pursue changing goals. What's a good harbor and what's a good route changes. Next, let's go through the logic we've presented in a class and a half. Right? Already we are starting to highlight the critical foundational logic of how the adaptive universe works. We start with finite resources and continuous change. Right? We don't pretend those can be stopped and then we'll add it in when we have to. We instead start with the full complexity, and that derives from this. We're always struggling with or adapting around finite resources. That leads us to bounds. Boundaries. Bounds are fundamental. There is a range of adaptive behavior. No matter how fancy the system, no matter how much artificial intelligence, machine learning, whether it's built by Tesla or whether it's built by Apple, it doesn't matter. Amazon drones, there is always a range of capabilities, right? There's an envelope. And we can improve that confidence envelope, but improving it does not remove surprise. It moves around surprise. Where and how surprise happens is different. It doesn't eliminate surprise. Let me give you a simple example. Darwin. We like Darwin in The Voyage of the Beagle and the Galapagos Islands. He goes to the Galapagos. What does he see? He sees finches. Right? Now, the original species was a generalized species. But as the finches were separated on the islands, the food resources on different islands were different. On one island, it was flowers. On the other island, it was seeds. So the finches on the seed island developed short, stout beaks to exploit seed resources. The finches on the flowering island, they had long, slender beaks to better extract nectar and the resources from the flowers. They developed they specialized. They became more optimal for their environment. They became more fit. So in biology, we don't refer to optimality, we refer to specialization and fitness, right? But it's never done. I'm not optimal. I'm always becoming more specialized. I'm becoming more fit. But the world changes, so I can become fit. Right? So if there is an environmental change and the distribution of food resources changes, who's going to be at an advantage? Right? If everything is stable, the generalized finch is at a disadvantage to the specialized ones. Right? From a competence envelope far from saturation, the generalized species is at a fitness disadvantage. Right? However, if the distribution of resources changes, or the kind of resources changes, who's at a disadvantage? The specialized species, right? So the flower extracting finches might be at a difficulty if the distribution of resources change because the flowers change because of extended drought, say. So they are more vulnerable to changes in the environment. And we actually have evidence in biology that biology can select for future adaptive capacity. The ability to adapt, to stay open to new possibilities. In problem solving, the same thing happens. If you're a good problem solver in a dynamic, uncertain world, what should you do? You should remain open or keep your options open. Ever hear that cliche, right? How do you act in ways that preserve the integrity and buy you time to figure out or get more information or get more assistance to handle it at the same time that you're trying to figure out more about what's really going on? If you close your options or commit too soon and it's the wrong way to go or something else happens, you can be in big trouble. So there's a value to staying open to future possibilities in a changing, uncertain world. How do we get a changing, uncertain world? Finite resource, continuous change, right, where all of the parties, all of the units in the network are continually adapting, right, to take advantage of resources, to avoid constraints and trouble ahead, right? It's not a passive environment, right? What makes it an active environment is the continuous adaptation of your neighbors. You and your neighbors are adapting, right? You guys have been adapting, and classes of students have been adapting to the changes that have been going on the educational technology side. And we tell stories about how you're out adapting us. And then we have to figure out ways to adapt to you because we all thought we were smart. Turns out you're much smarter because you can adapt faster than we can, even though we're smaller in number. And we have to wake ourselves up and go, oh, wait a minute, you're doing that? Oh, right? By the way, notice that's why I don't do classes that are just PowerPoint. I just don't hand them all out so you can just walk away with the PowerPoint and wait for the quiz, right? Because there isn't even a quiz, right? Okay, next. So surprise. Now, if you have a range and a boundary, there's something outside the range. That's why I use that map from the 12th, 13th century, right? This is the known world. What's outside the known world? There be dragons. There are surprises out there. I don't care what you do and you move your envelope around, there's still something outside your boundary. It's not empty desert. It's full of dragons. And by the way, it's changing dragons. So brittleness is what happens when you get near the boundaries and you saturate your capacity to respond. Why? Because you have a boundary and surprise is normal. Surprise is ongoing. So you have to have some capacity to maneuver, and you have to value the ability to maintain a capacity to maneuver in the future, which I just illustrated for you with the biology examples, right? This all works. It's the way the world actually really, really works. So I need graceful extensibility, even though it trades off with robust optimality, right? Specialization, getting more and more fit for well understood, frequently experienced conditions, even bringing in some robustness criterion about be good in case this bad thing happens or this disturbance arises, but it's a disturbance I understand pretty well. All right? I still need both, so I have to have net adaptive value. That leads us to a critical property. To be an adaptive unit, to be a unit of adaptive behavior, you must have non-zero graceful extensibility. You have to have some. Why? If you're a unit and you don't have any graceful extensibility, what's going to happen? A surprise will eventually occur. Your ability to handle surprise is zero. Performance collapses. How many performance collapses can you survive before that unit is no longer viable? We'll run through a case of a financial company where this happened and it only took one. They were bankrupt. We can talk about outages. Delta and Southwest just had outages on their digital service infrastructure that took down the whole airline. It only cost them $50 to $100 million. They survived. How many $50 to $100 million sudden losses would they survive and still be a viable organization? Right? So part of the graceful extensibility is that you have to be viable in the face of long-term change and surprise. Otherwise, what are you going to do? You're going to be great as long as things stay the same, and when things change, brittleness, collapse, you're done for. In the biological sphere, there wouldn't be. There has to be graceful extensibility to be an adaptive unit. You must be non-zero. But the bounds apply to all units of adaptive behavior. So I have to have some graceful extensibility. I can't have enough. That dilemma of the safety manager, where should I put my resources? Should I refresh crisis training, or should I do something different? What are really the signals and signs of trouble and dragons that show up? What should I be dealing with? I can't have unlimited resources. And the safety manager also illustrates this, which is, in the end, since any single unit can't have enough, it's going to need help. It's going to need help from its neighbors. And this is going to be important as we get into the second set of basic rules of how the adaptive universe works. We'll get into the network characteristics. This is Ostrom and the tragedy of the commons, and why we don't always get stuck in the tragedy of the commons. Right? So for next week, it's really important for you to go back through Ostrom. We'll also go through Al Ross some more, because we're going to start talking about the network relationships, not just what a unit does, the anesthesia team. We're going to be talking about the network that the safety manager is part of. Right? So graceful extensibility has to be greater than 0. You can't be completely brittle, because you wouldn't be viable in the long run. You would die out or collapse. Right? All right, quick caution. You will see, if you play around with complexity or read books on complexity, you will see charts like this. There are variations on this. I just saw one on my trip to Europe. It was worded differently and laid out differently, but has the same thing. There are 4 quadrants. The world can be, simpler and static. So this was linear and static. This was nonlinear, dynamic, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, the point is they always lay it out as 4, and they always think of it as, where are we now? Oh, we're in a simple world, we're in a complicated world, we're in a complex world, we're in a chaotic world. And we have rules for, so they want to say, where is my system, and what should I do when I'm in one quadrant or another? What we've laid out with the competence envelope, boundaries, dragons, and graceful extensibility says that is wrong. Not a little wrong, not sort of wrong, not okay, just completely wrong. It is very popular. You'll hear it all the time out in the world. You'll probably go to a training session and somebody will pop up this chart and pretend they actually understand something about complexity and complex adaptive systems. And if you say, that's just wrong, they'll be mad at you. But it's completely wrong. Not a little wrong, completely wrong. And I'll tell you stories over a beer about how it all came about. So where have we ended up? We have ended up with 3 of the fundamental rules of the basic universe, right? And their first ones, given we have finite resources and we have continuous change, is we have to manage the risk of saturation. If you're going to be adaptive in this universe, you must be able to manage the risk of saturation. So any unit at any scale has finite adaptive capacity. So all of them have a bound on their range or capacity for maneuver. 2, surprise is normal. Events will occur outside those bounds and challenge the adaptive capacity of any unit. Again, we will post all the slides. Therefore, when surprise occurs and demands a response, the unit will be brittle and subject to collapse unless it has some additional adaptive capacity. That's ability to stretch at the boundaries is graceful extensibility. Right? That's point 3. Since they all risk saturation, they have to have some means to extend performance, extend their base range, even though it may take different or extra resources that they have to invest in well in advance of when the performance is demanded. 3 fundamentals. We'll come back. We're going to cycle back through these, but we're quickly laying out the fundamentals. We'll do the next set next week about the network properties. Okay?